There are nights when you lie still in the dark, listening to the sound of your own heartbeat, yet you do not know why the pain still lingers. Everything seems to be in the past, but deep inside, there is still a small corner that has not been touched, has not been forgiven, has not been set free. That is where sorrow resides, where old memories remain seated, even though you have walked far, far away. Tonight, you do not need to chase it away. All you need is to open your heart just a little and let these magical Buddhist stories come close to you slowly, like a breeze passing over a lake, gentle yet enough to stir your soul. Before we begin this journey of healing, allow me to offer a small invitation. If you find these peaceful moments to be valuable, please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. That is how you plant a seed of compassion for yourself, so that whenever your heart feels weary, all you have to do is open this channel, and you will have a place to return to. Now find yourself a truly comfortable position. Take a deep breath and let every worry melt away with each exhale. From here, we will step into the world of Buddhist healing stories. Stories not just to hear, but to feel, to release, and to rest. Story 1. The glass that was already broken since the day we had it. Early in the season, mist quietly erased the border between the hill and the sky, the little slope leading up to the hermitage, looking like a soft charcoal line drifting on paper. The wooden door stood silent, exhaling the scent of old pine resin. Inside a low-ceilinged room, a neat bamboo shelf, a few ceramic bowls sitting quietly, a dark, earthy teapot stained with hearth smoke. In the midst of these rustic objects stood something as delicate as a clear song. A thin glass tumbler, the body so transparent that light passing through it became a faint silk thread. It stood there like a graceful stranger, intimate yet distant. The young disciple who had recently come up the mountain still carried the clatter of city habits behind him. He was accustomed to locking everything fragile within his life, believing that safety came from bolts, from putting away, from keeping things beyond reach. So each time he looked at that glass, his heart tightened, as though seeing a fledgling bird perched on a fragile branch. Once, he asked his teacher why they did not use a ceramic bowl for something sturdier. The teacher only smiled and said that there are some things made for us to see through, not for us to soothe our fear. Then the teacher poured the water, humming in the teapot, letting the stream of tea slide into the glass, releasing a gentle green fragrance. Light cut through the water, bending into a short golden streak on the straw mat. The disciple watched, forgetting even to blink his heart, both trembling and wanting to be near that tremble. Days at the hermitage passed slowly, like a stream that need not find the sea. Morning, the crows cry from the forest's edge, as though a punctuation mark set in mid-air. Noon sunshine deepening on the earthen wall. Afternoon, the scent of straw smoke trailing a thin line across the thatched roof. The young disciple began to learn how to pour, learned how to place, learned how to be still. The teacher said every object has its rhythm. The ceramic bowl has the rhythm of earth, the teapot, the rhythm of fire, and the glass tumbler, the rhythm of light. When you pick it up, do not pick it up by the old habit of the hand. Pick it up by the rhythm of the thing. He tried, as the teacher said, and suddenly his hand felt lighter, his eyes clearer, his breath slowed like a cloud drifting across a pond. That afternoon, rain fell. The first drops heavy like fingernails tapping gently on the roof. The teacher slowly shut a portion of the door. Set the teapot on the little earthen stove. Steam rose, touched his cheek coolly, like a greeting. The teacher lifted the glass, tilted it, admired the tea stream as one admires a horizontal wisp of smoke. At that moment, a breeze slipped through the door crack. The linen curtain fluttered softly. The teacher's finger caught the edge of the bamboo plate. The glass slipped from his hand, spun a delicate arc in midair, then gently tapped the tile floor. The shattering sound came strangely. It was not like a mournful cry, but like a raindrop hitting a thick banyan leaf, decisive and gentle, both. The disciple sprang up, eyes full of concern. The teacher remained seated like a mountain, simply leaned toward the scattered, transparent shards, gathered them, piece by piece, as if gathering fragments of time. On the mat was laid one brown sheet of paper. The teacher placed the pieces onto it, in an order no one taught, but everyone could understand. His hands unhurried, as though reading the final page of a long story. After the large shards came the smaller ones. Then the teacher took the straw brush and swept around, gathering the fine dust onto the sheet. He wrapped it up, held it, as though holding a book finished reading, then stepped out onto the veranda. Rain fell finer now, the ground outside the garden, soft, like a folk poem just recalled. At the foot of the small bamboo clump, he dug a shallow hole, placed the paper bundle in filled soil, back tapped the spade 3 times softly. Standing upright, he pressed his palms together, said nothing, his face luminous as though wiped clean. Back in the room, the teacher poured the remaining tea into a ceramic bowl, took a sip, then looked at the young disciple. His voice was soft, like a newly swept path. "That glass," he said, "was broken since the day we had it." The disciple stared, his heart stirring a reluctant ache, like a child not wanting the night festival to end. The teacher smiled, explained that every time something appears in its very form is already the shadow of the day it will fall apart. Autumn already lies in the green bud. The dusk is already on the edge of dawn. Knowing this does not make us cold. Rather, it allows us to be fully present in every moment still shining. The teacher lifted the ceramic bowl, handed it to the disciple. The fragrance of tea passed through his throat like a warm thread. The disciple closed his eyes, heard the teacher's words sink into his heart like a pebble quietly falling to the bottom of a well. That night, he lay listening to the rain. The sound of rain uneven, sometimes sparse, sometimes thick, like a person telling a story, but not wanting to hurry, afraid the listener might be exhausted. He recalled the things he had lost in life. A cricket that suddenly stopped chirping. A shirt his mother stitched when he was small. An unsent letter, a held hand at an afternoon when someone departed. Each memory had its own sound. Some sounded like dry leaves, crumbling, some like a slow footstep, some like a breath held too long. He suddenly understood a simple yet persistent truth. Everything left him in the way it must leave. And because he knows this, he can turn back to love what is still before him without snapping, without fear. The next morning, sunlight was like a cloth spread out in the yard. The teacher walked around to the bamboo clump, spread his hand, touched a new shoot. The stunted new leaf from yesterday had added another segment so green, as though heaven's resin flowed within it. The teacher told the disciple to look at the ground beneath the bamboo, the spot where the soil had been filled. In that earth now lay the glass scent just melted. It will make the soil cool. The earth nourish the roots nourish the shoot. One day, storms will come. The bamboo will break. The bamboo will become a broom. The broom will sweep the fallen pieces. The cycle of going and returning does not fight. It simply holds hands and walks through someone's house. Since the day the tumbler broke, the young disciple suddenly found that ordinary mornings brightened. He washed the teapot more slowly, letting water slide across the fired clay like a stream finding its path. He learned how to set down the bowl with half the weight of his hand, so the mat would not whisper under it, so his breath would not startle. He discovered a tiny chip at the rim of the ceramic bowl, shaped like a crescent moon, cradling a parched raindrop. At first, he intended to hide it from the teacher. Then he brought the bowl out and told him his hand had been clumsy. The teacher smiled, and said, "The new bowl has its own face." The disciple poured tea into that very bowl, and for the first time knew the taste of tea is not only from the leaf, the water, the fire, but also from a wound that knows how to remain silent. In the village down the valley, someone brought up another glass tumbler as a gift. The walls of that glass were thicker, and at the bottom it bore a small flower painted in pale violet. The person told the teacher that they had heard he liked to drink tea from a glass. The teacher thanked them, washed it clean, dried it, placed it on the bamboo shelf, and did not rush to use it. A few days later, when sunlight passed through the window like a golden cat, the teacher finally poured half a glass, lifted it to eye level, and told the disciple that the spirit of a thing does not lie in its shape or value. It arises from how we touch it. If we touch it with fear, the thing in our hands becomes a prison. If we touch it with presence, the object becomes a window. The disciple asked then how to touch with what heart, so that the thing becomes a mirror. The teacher said, with a heart of compassion, because only compassion reflects without cutting. One market morning, the disciple went down to the village to buy some coarse salt. The short hill road widened by the bamboo baskets on both sides, the smells of dry fish, banana leaves, hot earth. At an old stall, he saw ceramic bowls with flared rims, brown glaze, cracked with fine lines like underground water veins. He suddenly remembered the glass now resting under the bamboo clump. He thought that he no longer wanted to look for any copy of it. He wanted to go back and place a void on the shelf. That void was like a door left unlatched, letting light lie down, letting the dust of time have a seat, letting his eyes have a place to rest. He realized why last time the teacher stood so long before that empty space, and nodded, not to commemorate the object, but to learn the language of absence. There were afternoons when the wind changed direction, blowing back up from the valley. The hermitage felt wider by a notch, the scent of forest drifting in the scent of sunshine pulling back. The teacher said, "Move the seat out to the veranda. Place the teapot on the tile floor. Pour tea into the chipped bowl." Each person took a slow sip so that the sound of water in the chest might meet the sound of bamboo leaves outside. The teacher told a story from his youth. He once locked a crystal vase in a cabinet, standing guard over his fear, as though guarding a sunrise, afraid of theft. Until one day, the wind threw open the door. The vase fell. The tile floor became a shining field. he sat through the afternoon, watching the pieces roll together. Afterwards, he suddenly found in his heart a wet spot, wet in a sweet way, like earth newly receiving water. From that day, he no longer locked the things he feared losing. He placed them within reach. Some remained beside. A long time, some only passed by, but what stayed the longest was the feeling of truly living with them. One night, the young disciple woke with a start, not from a dream, but simply because the darkness suddenly felt kind, like a wide garment. He went to the tea room, sat before the bamboo shelf. The empty space between the two ceramic bowls radiated a thin streak of night. He placed his hand on his knee, listened to his breath pass through his throat like a small stream, cool at the tip of the tongue. He thought of the people who had passed through his life, the words left unfinished, the hands that had let go, the names that had grown faint. For the first time, he did not try to call them back, nor did he push them away. He sat between them as one tending a fire, watching both sides of night, knowing the flame would lessen, knowing the dawn would rise, not adding wood in panic, nor extinguishing it from fear of consumption. In that silence, he heard a very soft sound from the depths of the earth, like a young bamboo shoot cracking its sheath to sprout, like the sound of a seed of word emerging from the page. He understood he had changed his rhythm. When the season passed, the threshold when the early summer dust was still warm, but the leaves already quiet, the disciple asked permission to go down mountain for a few days to visit home. Before he left, he walked around to the base of the bamboo, bowed once, without needing to say his name. The ground had swollen with a sturdy green clump. He placed his hand on the bamboo stem, thanked the glass that no longer had its old form, but still soothed the heart. The teacher stood far off, watching, saying nothing. When the disciple turned to go, the teacher placed into his hand a bamboo ladle, saying, "Bring it along to scoop water when you are thirsty." The disciple laughed, asked how people in the city now just turn on a tap. The teacher answered that then all the more reason to bring it, to remember that drinking water is also a ritual. The disciple held the ladle as one holds a simple word people easily forget. The city greeted him with a bustle of sound lights stacked on shadows, people stacked on people. He visited his old home. Dinner smelled of sour soup and the sound of a spoon hitting the pot rim. On the living room shelf was a clear glass vase. Inside it, a rose branch, already wilted, petals curling in on each other like little fingers. His mother said yesterday the wind blew hard, the vase nearly fell. He stepped closer, placed his hand on the mouth of the vase, touched the cool surface, as though touching a fish newly drawn from water, then stepped back. He took the dry rose branch, walked out to the garden, dug a small hole under the areca, palm, buried it covered with earth, tapped his palms twice. No one asked, and no one needed to know. He came in, poured water for his mother, using a thin plastic cup, drank his portion from the familiar glass tumbler. The first sip passing his throat, he heard in it the sound of bamboo leaves in the hermitage garden, the sound of night rain breaking on the roof, the sound of the straw broom sweeping the circle, the sound of the teacher tapping the spade 3 times. He understood that those sounds did not belong to a place, they belonged to an attitude. On his return to the mountain, clouds pulled a long streak, like a hand-written line. He placed the bamboo ladle on the shelf, saw his hand suddenly steady, as though placing a line of words in the right spot. The teacher said, "Today you pour tea, and I will sit and listen." The disciple scooped water, waited for the first steam, lifted the lid of the teapot, let the hot aroma pass. His cheek spread the leaves into the clay kettle, poured one round, enough for the leaves to open, poured away that first water as though bidding farewell to an old breath, then poured the next round. He placed the teapot down. He held the bowl. He felt that among those actions, there was a layer of silence that glowed. When he handed the bowl to the teacher, he knew this morning had stood on its own 2 legs, no miracle needed. Someone asked the disciple afterward what the greatest lesson on the mountain was. He did not speak of a definition, did not quote a philosophy, did not cite a sutra. He told of a glass standing in the house, like a ray of light of an afternoon rain falling at an angle, of a touch he did not want, but that had come of fingers gathering shards like seeds of a brown paper bundle placed beneath a bamboo clump of 3 taps on the ground, of a sip of tea poured into a chipped bowl of an empty space between 2 ceramic bowls where light lies down to rest of a night without a lamp, where he saw his own face more clearly, of a crystal vessel once locked and then opened, of a path that needs no barrier yet grows less dangerous, of a phrase you may drink with your hands too, so long as you know how to drink. From then on, wherever he lived, he kept for himself a small courtyard in his heart. There was the shade of a slender bamboo clump, the sound of a dewdrop sliding down a leaf edge, a place ready to bury something that has come and must depart. There, old friends might enter. With a nod, new ones might sit with a breath. Sorrow could set a heavy bag down on a bench joy needed not leap, but still shine. He loved someone, always trying to keep that courtyard between them, so passing each other, they would not step on roots. So if one day a glass in their shared life fell, both would know how to bow, pick it up, together, wrap it together, bury it together, then make a new pot of tea. One very clear morning, the teacher asked if tomorrow all the bowls and dishes in the hermitage were to break. What would you do? The disciple answered, I would place my 2 hands out and drink with my hands. The teacher smiled, said, then you already know. Water needs a vessel, but the vessel is not the condition for thirst and fullness. The disciple looked out into the garden, saw the bamboo shoot, leaning slightly in the direction of the wind. Leaning, not breaking. In that lean, there was another lesson, that softness is not weakness, but a way of standing still within motion. Evening fell. Sunlight pulled away from the brick floor, slid into the base of the wall, leaving behind a zone of soft coolness. The disciple poured himself the final bowl of the day, thinking neither of the night nor of the morning to come, only tasting a ripened warmth in his mouth. Suddenly, he remembered the teacher's first words back when the glass was still standing on the shelf. There are things born for us to see through. Now he added the other half of the sentence himself, and once you have seen through them, let them go their own way. He placed the bowl down, his palm open, not holding on, not pushing away. There was still an empty space on the shelf, and in a place deeper than the shelf itself, there was another emptiness. Just like that. It did not demand to be filled, nor did it threaten with the sound of wind. It simply rested there like a patch of sky, brought indoors, reminding us that everything which has been broken since the day we had it is everything that gave us a rare chance to be present, to be grateful, and to be gentle. Night arrived. From afar, the sound of insects became a thin blanket draped over the valley. On the table, the teapot slowly cooled its final warmth, leaving the clay handle like a small bird taking flight. The disciple closed the door, his hand touching the wooden latch. Before going into his room, he turned and looked back at the bamboo shelf. A strip of early moonlight had landed right on the empty space between the 2 ceramic bowls, making that spot glow like a smile that made no sound. He brought his palms together softly. That gesture was not for a thing, nor for a person. It was for an understanding that had just grown larger than his fear. Then he went to sleep, and sleep came simply, like a leaf falling from a branch at the right season, without a cry, without regret, only with a softness as sure as the earth. Tomorrow. When he opened his eyes, he would once again pour water, smell the leaves, listen to the wind, place the bowl, and if something were to fall, he would bend down with a heart that knew it was ready. Story 2. The Bowl of Still Water and a Gentle Heart. Afternoon fell over the valley, like a panel of silk being let go, the last rays of sunlight thinning on the thatched roof, the scent of warm straw mingling with mist. In the small hermitage at the foot of the hill, the teacher sat by a low bamboo table, placing upon it a wooden bowl darkened by time. The bowl bore no ornamentation, no carvings, just faint circles of age appearing like the veins in the palm of a hand. The young student entered, his face still flushed from an argument by the stream, where some village friends had unknowingly touched his pride. He closed the door, sat down, his breath urgent like a fish caught in a net. The teacher did not ask immediately. He simply pulled the bowl closer, scooped water from the bamboo spout, placed the bowl before the student, and spoke softly. When your heart is hot, look at this surface of water until it stands still. Then speak. The student pressed his lips as though wishing to unleash a torrent of words, to prove himself right, to defend the surge of heat, like wind feeding a fire. But the teacher's gaze placed the quiet sky into the room, forcing the student's words to line up in weight. The student looked down. On the surface of the bowl was a miniature sky smaller than the sky outside the veranda, but closer, clearer. The thatched roof dipped into pointed forms. A silver cloud backlit a mosquito gliding by, leaving a faint ripple. The water's surface trembled with the student's heartbeat. Each time his heart pounded harder, the surface quivered another pulse. He had never seen his heart map itself onto a surface like that. In that moment, his heart was no longer in his chest. It was in the bowl. He inhaled deeply. The breath brushed his throat like a dry leaf passing through a doorway. The teacher remained silent, only the cricket's song fluttering below the wall, and the winds opening and closing beside the row of bamboo. At first, the student stared at the water as though it were an adversary to be tamed, wanting it to stand still, quickly, wanting to force its obedience. But each time his will clamped down, the water trembled like a child being urged. He realized his urgency itself was a gust of wind. He changed tactic. He relaxed his shoulders, let his palm rest, looked as though looking at a night's spark, neither blowing nor fanning, just watching. The ripples in the bowl gradually shrank from large circles to smaller ones, from sharp lines to soft curves. After a while, the silver cloud backlit appeared whole. The thatched roof's triangles settled. For the first time since leaving the stream, he heard a small sound from within himself, like the underground watercourse flowing quietly beneath pebbles. The anger did not vanish, but he seemed to give it a chair to sit on. He looked up at the teacher's eyes that had borne more wind than people. The teacher nodded lightly. The student told the story of the stream-side incident without waving his hand or inserting sharp words. He told it slowly, like pouring water from the pot into a ceramic bowl. When he reached the moment someone used a heavy phrase, he saw the water surface tremble in the bowl, then rest again. He suddenly laughed. He had just seen a subtle measure, a different compass, one not of the body's fever, but of the heart's. The teacher asked what he had learned from the bowl of water. The student responded, "I saw that anger is a gust of wind, and the bowl is a quiet hill. If wind passes over the hill does not chase the wind. The hill is there, so the wind grows less tired." The teacher smiled and said, "Then the bowl of water has taught you. I need not say more." In the days that followed, the young student brought the bowl into the garden, placed it on a flat stone beneath the pomelo tree's canopy. Whenever he sensed his heart about to run wild, he poured water into the bowl, sat down, and looked. Some days, the wind blew hard. The water's surface speared into sharp ripples. He did not grow angry at the wind. He drew the bowl into a slightly sheltered spot from the wind, but not completely enclosed. He wanted the wind still to touch the water, so that the two might learn to live together. On days when the sun blazed too fiercely, the surface of the water gleamed, the light fracturing the tree's reflection. He gently rotated the bowl, seeking an angle where the sun became soft. He realized he was learning a silent art the teacher did not name, an art of placing one's heart in the right place, the right angle, the right moment. One midday, a villager passing by saw him gazing at the bowl of water and smiled, saying the young man was dreamy. He did not explain. He remembered that a few months earlier he would have laughed the same. That afternoon, the person returned, face bruised from a fall on the slope. The student brought the bowl of water out, filled it, told him to look until the sting in his heart subsided. The other grumbled, but being thirsty, he drank. Before drinking, he looked, and the pain seemed to slip a little from his bones. When he placed the bowl down, he asked, "What kind of water is this? That is strange." The student replied, "Just spring water, but before you drink it, look at it until it is still." The other nodded, no longer, smiling. The student smiled, knowing that the bowl of water had begun another journey, passing through other hands, carrying another breath. In the hermitage, the teacher still left the wooden bowl on the table like a friend. Some evenings, the teacher and the student sat quietly, the bowl placed between, like a moon lying on the tabletop. The teacher said, "Each day you keep a moment of stillness as you keep water in the bowl, not necessarily large, just enough for you to see that your own face is not distorted by the wind. When you work, do it as though you pour water. Know when to pour, know when to wait, know when to discard the first flow to carry away the dust. When you speak, speak as though you place the bowl down. There is weight, but it does not oppress. Silence, but not suffocation. When you are angry, look as you did, looking at the water, not blaming the wind nor the water, but adjusting direction, space, yourself." Story 3. The bowl of still water and a gentle heart. But there were days when the student failed. One afternoon, rain came. His friend from the village climbed up the hermitage, seeking help over a boundary dispute at the edge of the valley. They came dragging heavy words, suspicious glances, pointing fingers. The student stepped out to mediate his heart, wanting to help his words, wanting to resolve. But in the very moment he wanted to resolve, he chose thorny words. One of the group lost patience, shoved him. The student flared up, pushed back. In one instant, the bank of the irrigation ditch collapsed. The two men fell into the mud. Cries rang out under the rain. When things had calmed, the student returned to the hermitage, his robe stained with mud, his eyes still flashing. The teacher looked at him without reproach. The teacher brought the wooden bowl. The student poured water. The bowl filled, and the water jumped over its rim, spilled onto the table, forming a streak. The student looked in, saw his own face shatter into many pieces, each shard speaking a sentence. He sat still longer than any previous time, longer, until the hearth fire died, longer, until the mosquito ceased its buzzing by his ear. Finally, the water stilled. When the water became still, a question arose. When I wanted to help someone in that rainy afternoon, did I want to help them? Or did I want to help the ego burning inside me for feeling disrespected? The question entered him like a fine needle. No pain, but awakening. He nodded to himself. The next morning, he went down to the village, sought the one who shoved him, apologized first, not waiting for the other to retract his hand. No one on the path knew the story, but he knew, and the bowl knew. The teacher told him a story from his youth. He too had once been given a bowl by his teacher, as this teacher was giving now. At that time, he did not understand. He thought the bowl was a tool, a trick, a plaything of the practitioner. He had viewed the bowl with the eyes of one who wanted to conquer his anger. Victory is a thought that smells of gunpowder. It heats the heart and stings the eyes. Only when one day he stood before his father's coffin, many people came to offer condolences, every phrase correct, but none touching the place where he hurt. He returned, placed the bowl on the table, poured water. The water trembled by his hand, trembled by his heart. He sat until the incense scent vanished. Sat until the last dog's bark at the end of the lane died. Sat until inside the bowl remained only a thin sky, not a ripple anywhere. In that moment, he understood the bowl was not a tool. The bowl was the teacher, and he no longer wished to conquer his pain or his anger. He only wished to sit beside them as one sits beside a tired friend, to place one's hand on their shoulder and say nothing. In the seasons that passed afterward, the student matured in the way of water, not uprooting from the earth, but not afraid of changing shape either. The wooden bowl traveled with him to many places. Up on the ridge, he gathered bamboo shoots. The bowl held rainwater. At the early market, the bowl caught water to wash wild greens. Under the moon, overnight, the bowl gathered moonlight like a song without words. When someone was angry, he would place the bowl between them. No sermon needed. Some would understand immediately. Some would sneer. Some would call it nonsense. Some would pause, not because they believed him, but because for a moment they saw their own face in the water and startled at how long they had been frowning. One autumn evening, a storm arrived. The hermitage roof screeched. The bamboo thicket leaned in like blades trying to hide. The teacher told the student to go inside. The teacher stayed to tie several ropes. The wind battered. One corner of the roof lifted water, splashed into the room. The student rushed out, held the door. In the chaos, the wooden bowl fell from the shelf, rolled across the floor, stopped at the foot of the table. When the storm quieted, the room was sodden. The wooden bowl remained intact. The student picked it up, washed it clean, placed it back in its place. The teacher entered, hair wet, as though just drawn from the stream. The teacher looked at the bowl, smiled kindly, said, "There are things not fragile like their appearance. There are things more fragile than their appearance. The bowl has passed the storm. The water in the bowl will know how to stand still more quickly in the future." The student touched the bowl's rim, thanked it, as one thanks a person who lent you their shoulder for a night of tears. He gradually realized the bowl did not only teach him about anger, it taught him how to see everything. When his joy ran too wild, he poured water, looked. Joy is like midday sun, dazzling until you are blind. Looking a while, joy softens, stops dancing, stands beside you like a good friend. When fear arises, he poured water, looked. Fear is like mist clinging to every surface, dampening sleep. Looking a while, the mist clears, reveals a little path through the garden, reveals a dry row of bricks on the veranda, reveals a wooden door handle you can turn. When laziness came, he poured water, looked. Laziness is like mud dragging your feet to the bottom. Looking a while, the mud settles. The bottom appears not as deep as you thought. He understood the bowl is a window opening to the lowest layers of truth, where everything stops pretending, reveals its bare face. Years passed. The student was no longer as young as the day he left the stream in a blaze. He learned to stand before a storm without hating it, to stand before sun without craving the sun. He walked through a busy market as through a grove, his eyes choosing ripe fruit, though his hand did not want to pick many. He heard someone mock him as a dreamer, listened as though hearing a knock on the door. If it needed opening, he would open. If not, he'd let wind flow in and out freely. He kept the bowl on the table. There were days he forgot to wash it. Next day, a little water remained, leaves of stories not yet closed. He washed it, wiped it, placed it back. Some days, he did not need to pour water. Just looking into the empty bowl, he saw his own reflection, sharp, as though his heart had become its own body of water. Then, one day, the teacher told him, "Sit down," placed the bowl between them. The teacher asked, "Do you know why I chose the wooden bowl and not a stone bowl or a porcelain bowl?" The student said, "I think because the wooden bowl is warm to the touch, easy to carry, less likely to break." The teacher nodded, but added, "Wood carries the memory of the forest. When you place water into wood, the forest remembers the rain. When you place your eyes into the water, the forest leads you to the place the rain passed. Stone remembers the mountain. Porcelain remembers the fire. Wood remembers the leaf. Everything has a homeland, and when you touch a thing with presence, you are taken to its homeland. Therefore, when you look at the water in the wooden bowl, you are sitting beneath the forest's canopy. You hear a bird passing, another branch. You hear a dry fruit fall to the leaf litter. In that place, anger becomes a pebble. By the path you may kick it, but you no longer wish to pick it up and throw it at someone else. At the season's end, the teacher fell ill with a mild sickness. The room smelled of herbal medicine and faint tea. The student made a weak brew, placed it beside the bed. The teacher drank a sip and told the student, "Pour water into the bowl as you have always done." The student poured the bowl, filled to the rim, the water's surface taut like a small drum. The teacher looked his eyes layered with mist, but not sadness. He said, "It is time for you to place the bowl somewhere else, not only on the table, not only under the pomelo canopy, not only in the hermitage. Place a bowl in your chest. Whenever you are about to say something unnecessary, look into that bowl. Whenever you are about to judge someone, look into that bowl. Whenever you think you understand everything, look into that bowl. When you live with the bowl in your chest, you can go anywhere and still sit in the forest." That night, the student placed his hand on his chest, closed his eyes, imagined a small bowl shaped like a crescent moon placed there. He poured into the bowl a bit of his breath, watched until the surface became clear, like a piece of sky. From that day on, when he stood in a strange market, when he was stuck in a dusty road, when he stood in a room full of people speaking loudly, he could still glance down at his bowl. He discovered that he could slow his pace by half a beat without falling behind, choose a softer word without losing meaning, let go of someone's sigh without losing warmth in his eyes. And then came the day when the teacher left like a leaf falling from a branch in the right season. There was no cry, there was no odd storm, just a full golden afternoon. The temple bell in the valley, long tolling the bowl of water on the table, standing still like a well mouth. The student sat alongside, took the teacher's hand. The teacher's hand, light as a fresh blade of grass. He placed the bowl back in its old spot beside the teapot. He did not cry loudly, did not cover his face. He looked into the bowl. In the water, the sky glowed a round cloud drifting slowly. He remembered the teacher's words about the homeland of things, and he understood that his teacher was leading him to the homeland of people. That homeland is not in earth, not in clouds, not in words. It is in a silence wide enough for a drop of water to fall without startling. Many years later, the student had gone far. He built a small hermitage on the edge of a midland town beside a tea hill. Every morning, mist fell like strings of beads hanging on spider silk, and the ground smelled of damp leaves. He still placed a wooden bowl on his table. When someone came and asked why there were fewer shouts here than in the market, fewer fist bangs than in taverns, he simply smiled and poured water. Some people sat down, looked for a while, then quietly said it had been a long time since they saw their own face and did not hate it. Some sat down and cried before they could even look. Some sat down, saw the water tremble with their heartbeat, and realized they no longer needed to be fierce to appear strong. He placed a hand on their shoulder, said nothing. The wind in the tea hills spoke for him. The water in the bowl spoke for him. And the voice of their own hearts spoke the rest. One late afternoon, a lost child wandered into the hermitage. The child held a stone, eyes bright like a raindrop. It asked if the bowl could really make water stand still. He nodded and said, "Try it." The child poured clumsily water, spilling across the table. He did not scold. They watched together. The water trembled because the child's hands trembled because the small hands had not yet learned their own rhythm. After a while, the water stilled. The child softly exclaimed, "That's amazing." It said that the next time it got mad at a friend, it would go find a bowl of water. He smiled and said, "If you do not have a bowl, use your palms. Cup them together. That's a bowl too." The child cupped its hands, bent down to look eyes wide and sparkling. It waved goodbye, ran off toward the hill, its hair flying like grass. Night fell. The hermitage was quiet. The wooden bowl sat like a low note. The student, now with silver at his temples, still placed the bowl down with the same gentleness, like placing a final sentence. He poured himself a sip of water, drank slowly, without toasts, without promises. Deep within, he could feel the bowl in his chest, quietly reflecting the surface, still the sky clear. He thought about the road he had walked, about the first anger he had ever poured into the bowl, about the laughter of villagers who once saw him sitting under the pomelo tree, about the storm that lifted a corner of the hermitage roof, about the day the teacher led him back to the homeland of wood. All of it now gathered into a single quiet line, running through yesterday and tomorrow. He blew out the oil lamp. Before stepping into his room, he turned once more to look at the wooden bowl. On the surface of the water was a thin streak of late moonlight. That streak said nothing. It simply lay there, like a hidden smile. He placed his palms together. In the dark, he whispered, as if speaking to an old friend, "Thank you for giving me new eyes to see anger like a passing wind. Thank you for giving me new hands to cup the water and see myself. Thank you for giving me a new heart wide enough to hold a still bowl inside without fearing someone might knock it over. Outside, the tea hills murmured in a low voice like the earth singing a lullaby. Inside the hermitage, sleep stepped in on silent feet. The wooden bowl still stood on the table like a quiet moon. And within the heart of one who had learned to sit still, the water lay calm, not because the wind no longer came, but because he had learned how to let the wind pass through without sweeping the sky away. Story 4. The Riverbank, placed in the heart. That morning, the mist lay thin like a veil over the ridge. The dirt path leading down to the damp sandbank, marked by bird prints mingled with old sandal tracks. The two teachers and students left the hermitage just as the crow's call finished, half a phrase carrying with them the scent of early tea and the lingering hint of last night's frost. Below them, the river swelled like a deep breath. The water was muddy from the night's rain, the current rolling up brown gold veins. On the bank, a young woman stood hesitantly, her hand clutching a fold of her dress, her gaze drifting to the opposite shore where the market was gathering the calls for cakes, and the knife thud of chopping sounded a kind of peaceful noise that now felt to her like a dream. She had tried to wade across, but the river's scent of silt and rotting straw made her recoil. This side was too slick, the other side too distant. Between them lay a band of water with many sounds and few words. The student glanced at his teacher. His heart thudded, not because of the river, but because of the young woman. Back in his village, he had been taught that a practitioner keeps their precepts as they keep their breath, not letting the body mingle with things that easily spark the eyes into flame. He thought of boundaries like fences. To touch means pain, to cross means guilt. But the teacher looked calm, as though gazing at an old pomelo tree, serene but seeing much. The teacher asked the woman if she needed help. She nodded, her voice tired yet urgent. Her parents waited on the far bank. Her home had matters. The teacher bent and told her to loop her arms around his shoulder, to place her foot on his thigh, saying, "Do not fear." The student stood beside them, his body stiff, embarrassed for the woman, confused by the teacher's move. He was about to speak something, to remind to stop, but his throat dried, as though a handful of ash lay on his tongue. The teacher carried her, stepping into the water. The current encircled his calves like a gentle python, strong but not biting. He walked slowly each step, like placing a letter on paper. The woman pressed her forehead to his back the warm breath through the rough cloth, her hand trembling lightly. He could not tell if it was from cold or from bashfulness. The water rose to knees, then thighs, then receded as they reached a sandbank midstream. Each step was a small decision, not between stop or go, but between hard or soft. The student watched in his chest a rough drum beat. No music, only the sound of pounding. When they reached the far bank, the teacher knelt on one knee, letting her step onto dry land. She bowed, thanked him profusely, ran toward the market. Her shadow quickly blended into the other shadows, a dot of color pulled from the wide cloth of the morning. The teacher returned droplets trailing from his trousers into little shining lines. Neither of them spoke. They continued along the riverbank toward the wooden bridge a few miles ahead. The sun rose, the scent of fresh mud mixed with moist grass. Birds began to hop between branches. The student walked a bit behind, his eyes fixed on the cracked path studded with snail shell fragments, but his heart watched the teacher's back. That back had carried a person, and now the student must carry the image of it on his shoulders. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her hand on the teacher's shoulder, a strand of her hair stuck to the brown cloth, a drop of water running down his back, then vanishing into the belt. The memory felt like a thin thorn between skin and fabric, not painful enough to bleed, but persistent enough to remind. By midday, when the shadow of the star tree cast a long patch of shade like a mat, the teacher stopped and said they should rest. He sat and pulled out rice wrapped in leaves, chewing slowly, as though listening to the wind whisper a short thunder line. The student remained standing. At last, he could not bear it, and asked the teacher, his voice, part reproach, part fear of his own voice. How can you do that? How can you forget the precepts as if a rope fastening a door? The teacher looked up silently into the student's eyes, long enough to see the small storm inside. The teacher said, "We set the woman down from the river, but you are still carrying her across." That sentence went into the student like a pebble dropped into water, not a splash, but rings expanding to the bank. He sank down his thighs, hollow. He broke off a piece of rice with trembling hands. He realized he had spent the morning not looking at the river, not looking at the road, not looking at the sky, but looking at the shadow which had just left him. He had left behind what might have nourished him to hold on to something no longer there. After they ate, the teacher told him to proceed. The road began to incline, the sunlight shifting. Trees stood sparse, the ground showing more small cracks like the wrinkles at the corner of an older person's eye. The student walked silently, the teacher's words and the morning's images walking beside him. He tried to place the woman down in his mind, as the teacher had told him. At first, she would not settle, or rather, he would not allow her to settle. That image was like a coat he had worn so long, he would feel cold if he removed it. He tried again. This time he imagined the feeling of water embracing his foot. He let the current flow through his memory, as it had through the teacher's calves. After a while, the faint shadow softened like a cloud dissolving to reveal clear sky. He looked up and saw on a high branch a crested myna tilting its head, its crest red, like an exclamation mark placed at the end of a gentle sentence. He smiled, not from a joke, but because he saw again the bird he had walked past this morning, as though it had not been there. In the afternoon, they crossed the wooden bridge. Beneath the bridge, the water darkened, carrying green streaks of decaying leaves. On the bridge, the wood creaked quietly beneath their feet, telling an old story of people long gone. The teacher asked him to stop lean on the railing. He asked, "Do you know why you carry someone inside your head so long?" The student said, "I thought because I feared. Fault. Feared that I was wrong. Feared others saw it, feared myself." The teacher nodded and said, "All correct, but there is one more thing. You like the feeling of being the guardian, because when you guard, you feel important. That importance is like a kind of intoxication. You drink it, and you feel clear, but in fact, you are drunk. When you set someone down from your shoulders, you also set down your own importance. That is why you clung." The student listened, his forehead warming as though sunshine had entered. He recalled his old times when someone spoke a word not to his liking. He carried that word on his shoulders for days, brought it into his meal, carried it into bed at night. He asked himself if he loved those burdens, because they gave him a hidden identity that he was the one who understood right and wrong, the one who labeled the one who judged. He felt shame at that discovery, but shame too is a kind of water. When it flows rightly, it can wash away old stains. Story 5. The letter, never sent evening, fell like a thin scarf draping over the city roofs. The late sunlight withdrew behind the old arcades. Car horns faded into distance, leaving a lone crow calling once before silence. In a small upstairs room, a man sat quietly at a wooden table. The tabletop bore faint knife marks from his cooking days, dark and pale patches like seasons of rain and sun flowing past. On it sat a cup of tea, now cooling warmth lingering on the handle, and a brown-bound notebook of blank pages. He opened it. The first page was so white, his eyes blinked. Long ago, he had promised himself to write a letter, not to send, but to lay down a stone he had carried in his chest for years. Yet each time he sat, words barely formed before anger pushed into his hand like an impatient guest, forcing the door, spilling the tea, breaking his breath. He touched pen to paper. The first line slid out like a streak of rain along the eaves. He did not name the recipient, nor begin with polite address. He began with a small truth, that this afternoon the wind was gentle and the ceiling fan hummed like an old song. Then he wrote of the wooden bridge by the southern river where they once ate ice cream, laughed when it dripped on their hands, made plans for a trip that never happened. The opening lines were light, like a pinch of new leaves. By the fifth line, his grip tightened. Words grew sharp corners of memory, surfacing like hidden rocks. He wrote that he had been left behind like a chair in a living room. Winter draped across its back, no one pulling it close to the fire. He wrote of nights he could not sleep because an old sentence crawled out of the drawer he thought he had locked. He wrote that he had chased every road lit by lamps, yet none led him home. He paused. On the table, the tea had gone cold, its surface flat as thin glass. In it, he saw his face. Not the face of someone abandoned, but of someone clinging to the abandoned thing, like clutching a thick blanket in midsummer. He exhaled long and deep. He recalled his mountain teacher's words. When anger insists on speaking, let it speak through ink, but do not let it break the bowl. He set the pen down, stood, walked to the window. Outside, almond leaves reddened like open envelopes. He unlatched the window. Air swept in dust motes, glimmering in sunlight, like a school of tiny fish swimming through the room. He returned to the desk. On the half-written page, the sharp sentences stood beside the soft ones, like two strangers seated together, unsure what to say. He laid his palm on the paper, feeling its grain. He thought, if this letter were only an indictment, I could send it, receive an apology, or a thick silence. And then what? But if the letter were a small bridge spanning a deep hollow, not for anyone to cross, but for him to stand midway, looking down, seeing the water, the old stones, and his reflection trembling gently. He lifted the pen again and wrote on. This time, he no longer spoke of the other person. He spoke of himself. He wrote that once he had loved the bitterness of coffee more than its sweetness, because bitterness reminded him he was alive. He wrote that he had learned to wash a cracked bowl without letting it crack further. He wrote that he was grateful for the mornings spent alone, baking bread, the oven glowing red, like a heart freshly named. The words began to change color from heavy, dark strokes to something clearer, as if rain were washing dust off leaves. He remembered his last visit with the teacher, who said each person carries a chest inside, are things worth keeping and things to release. Yet we often reverse them, clutching what weighs us down and forgetting to open our hands for what can fly. This letter, the teacher had said, is the key. Open the chest. See everything in honest light. No mask, no polish. Whatever lets you breathe easier, keep. Whatever makes your shoulders rise, set down. The man smiled. His pen moved slower now, pausing to listen to the wind, like a walker on sand, pausing to shake grains from his cuffs. He wrote of a rainy night when the street was slick and he slipped in front of a shop. A stranger's hand lifted him. No words, no lecture. Just 2 seconds of steadiness before walking away. He wrote that some kindnesses have no name, but stay within us like a round stone, keeping the boat balanced. He wrote that his old love had taught him to smell rain from afar, to know when to shut windows before water reached the books, to keep one drawer always for a dry towel, to understand that some people enter our lives merely to teach a single word enough. That word does not mean forever. It means thank you. When the first page filled, he turned to the second. The lines now flowed evenly. He began to speak of forgiveness, not forgiving others first, but forgiving the man he once was, the one who said, cutting things, thinking he was defending pride, the one who sent long midnight messages like anchors flung into emptiness, the one who walked past an old chair in a shop, not realizing he would someday need a place to sit still. He placed a hand over his chest. His heartbeat sounded like a craftsman tapping gently. He wrote that he forgave himself for not knowing, for knowing too well, for knowing, yet still doing for not doing when he should. Forgiveness cannot erase dried ink, but it can keep the next page from smudging. He paused, sipped cold tea. The quiet bitterness felt like a nod. Outside, lights began flickering on. A window opposite glowed a small square pasted on the night. He continued writing of a ritual his teacher had once taught. When finished, fold the letter, tie it with a small cord, bring it to the garden, dig a shallow pit beneath a tree. Place it there, cover with earth. Pat your hands 3 times, not to bury and forget, but to let the letter change shape, to let anger and sorrow decompose into good soil that feeds roots, so next season an unnamed flower might bloom in time. He straightened up, noticing the notebook half filled. He knew tonight he would fold it, tie it, walk downstairs into the yard. Before folding, he wrote one last paragraph, a blessing for the other person. Not the obligatory wish for happiness, but a wish for a window overlooking green trees, for learning to cook, a warm soup, for shoes that fit to walk long roads without blisters, for a friend who knows when silence is enough for a chair to sit on, and listen to rain without feeling life as a whole. He wrote that if they met again someday in a marketplace, he would smile as one smiles at a leaf falling at the right season. No need for words, only a nod, because both had already moved on. He folded the letter, the cord tied softly, like tying a bough of pastries for a friend. He turned off the light, descended the creaking wooden stairs. The garden was dark, the scent of soil after sun, lingering warm and mild. He dug a small hole beneath the young lemon tree, set the letter in as one sets the first brick of a new step. He covered it, patted the earth 3 times, not from faith in miracle, but because hands need rhythm to tell the heart the task is done. He stood still, hearing the night move through leaves. A neighbor closing a door. Gently, a cat leaping the fence, its claws making a faint click. He breathed. The breath no longer scraped against a sharp edge of paper inside his chest. In the days after, he did not check the lemon tree each morning, did not wait for proof the ritual had worked. He simply watered it as usual. When he remembered, he watered. When busy, he let the rain do the rain's part. A month later, the tree sprouted a new green shoot. No one knew that beneath the soil, a letter was slowly dissolving. Perhaps a few words survived where the rain had not reached. Perhaps the blessing line had melted into the earth, becoming a fine thread that helped roots find their way. He looked at the fresh leaf and felt inside himself a small patch of green where once it had always been dark. One afternoon, a neighbor came by and asked why he'd been frowning less these past few days. He smiled and said, maybe because the air was cooler. The neighbor didn't believe it teased him and said maybe it was because there was someone new. He shook his head and said, no, it was because of an unsent letter. The neighbor raised an eyebrow, didn't quite understand, but let it be saying, each house has its own way of finding peace. He poured tea, hot tea, and drank slowly, tasting the bittersweet slide across his tongue like a small boat passing under a bridge, leaving a quiet streak. That night, he slept. Sleep came not like a struggle, but like a friend pulling the blanket up across his shoulders and saying, "That is enough. Now, go rest." The next year, the lemon tree bore its first fruit. A small lemon, the skin glossy, the scent of its essential oils releasing at the slightest touch. He picked one, cut it in half, juice sprayed into his fingertips. The sour smell made his mouth flood with saliva, like a child's. He mixed honey, squeezed the lemon, poured warm water. The glass of water glowed like a midday sun passing over the wooden shelf. He took a sip, felt a dignified sweetness. He suddenly thought of the unsent letter buried somewhere in the ground, thought of its words becoming part of this lemon's taste, thought of the evenings he had sat before the blank page and put the pen down at the right moment. He smiled, grateful, even for the days that had been dark, because if there had been no darkness, how else would he have recognized the gold? From time to time, when the wind blew strong, a smell of old paper seemed to drift up from the garden. Maybe it was just the scent of damp earth, maybe the imagination of someone used to letters. But each time that scent came, he felt lighter. He understood that forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is remembering without bitterness, remembering without needing to reclaim, without passing verdicts, without endless why questions. Remembering, like remembering an old road across a harvested rice field, traveling it occasionally, to know you have grown, then moving on to roads with other rows of trees. One evening, he opened the notebook, began a new letter. This time, he wrote to himself. He wrote that if one day he felt weighed again, he should remember to dig a hole, pat his hands 3 times, tie the cord just right, not too tight, not too loose. He wrote that let unsent letters be seeds, not stones. Seeds, when buried in the right place, grow something that breathes. Stones keep someone stuck at a bank. He signed his name without date. He folded the letter, did not tie the cord, placed it in a drawer, not to save it, but to remind himself that some things need not be buried. They only need to be laid down quietly. On the table, a fresh cup of tea gave off a thin wisp of steam, like a thread continuing to write. Outside, the street went to sleep to the scattered sounds of lock bolts and distant cars. He turned off the light, stood a moment in the warm darkness. In his chest, a small door had been closed, not locked, just closed enough so the wind would not blow too hard. And in that just right quiet, he heard a very soft sound, like the earth drinking water after a sunny day, the sound of an unsent letter that had already become humus, nourishing a new root, growing deeper into home. Story 6. The Candle and the Wind. Afternoon tilted onto the monastery courtyard in a thin sheet of honey light, the red bricks heated through the day, now cooling as warmth slid away like a serpent quietly retreating into its lair. On the veranda, a row of wooden candle holders stood in a straight line, each holding a small, pale yellow candle. Little Sa, the youngest novice monk, carried the basket of candles, walking and counting his lips, murmuring to steady his nerves. He liked the candle lighting hour at dusk because the courtyard then felt strange, no longer day, not yet night, each object seeming to recall its face before darkness fully arrived. The abbot stood on the porch, hands behind his back, eyes following each of the boys' movements. When little Sa lit the first candle from the half-burned incense stick, a thin gust of wind blew. The tiny flame flickered. He snapped his hand over it. The flame clung lightly to the wick, then stood. With each candle, he bent over, tilted the burning stick, waited for the small flicker of light. The scent of wax and warm wood blended into something simple and pure. At the seventh candle, the wind changed direction, stronger now, like a mischievous child refusing to sit still. The candle blew out with a pop. Little Sa, panicked, relit it. Again, it went out. He withdrew his body inward, shielded with both palms, exhaled a gentle breath so the flame would not choke. This time, the flame held, but only a few steps further. Another gust was already waiting. Every time he erected a flame, the wind sought to extinguish it. By halfway down the row, he sighed. Sweat broke out on his temples. He looked up at the abbot, eyes pleading. The abbot smiled, did not speak, only raised his hand in a tilt, a gesture that said, "Bend with the wind." Little Sa tilted the candle in the wind's direction. Strangely, the flame no longer wavered. It leaned, embraced the wick, and stood. He changed his posture, his walking rhythm, even moved the candle's position on the brick ledge to meet the wind's direction. The tiny flame seemed to understand, stopping its trembling. He finished lighting the row before full darkness. When he returned to the porch, the abbot asked, "What did you learn from the wind?" Little Sa answered, "I learned how to lean." The abbot nodded softly. The smile passed over his eyes like a sliver of light, brief but warm. Night arrived, and the candles turned the courtyard into a low sky. Villagers came to offer incense. Candlelight glowed on their cheekbones, each face like an old page placed under a lamplight. An elderly woman arrived, hand trembling, placed incense off-center. Little Sa hurried to steady her. A child walked with his mother, eyes round like 2 drops of wax not yet set. A young couple stood apart, silent, simply watching the candles and smiling faintly, the smile of people who had argued earlier, but now realized it was all for one small grain of dust. The wind still swept the courtyard, but the wind had learned to step gently. Or perhaps the candle lighter had learned not to view the wind as the enemy. The next morning, the abbot asked little Sa to take an unlit candle and go into the village. "Today you visit 3 homes," the abbot said. "One family just had a child. One is grieving someone gone. One just moved in at the head of the lane. Bring a candle to each." Little Sa was surprised. "Venerable sir, why a candle?" The abbot replied, "Because all 3 need light, but not the same kind." Little Sa held the candle as he walked downhill. At the first home, the newborn cried like a thin thread newly drawn. The mother lay sideways. Sweat beaded her temple. The grandmother received the candle, smiling. "For our baby's good fortune." Little Sa looked at the child wrinkled like a young leaf, not yet straightened, and half-breathed, as though afraid to extinguish something newly lit. In the second house, a white cloth hung at the door. The scent of incense mixed with medicinal herbs. The man lay in the middle of the room, hand on his belly, as one who had completed a long journey and now rests. His wife received the candle and placed it on the altar, speaking no word. Little Sa bowed. His back straightened, not to show strength, but to align with the wind that blew across the house, helping it feel less cold. He remembered the abbot's words. "Some candles are lit to see the path clearly. Others are lit so that tears know where to flow." In the third new-moved house, the furniture was still bought. The man fussed with bed assembly, his hands awkward, but his eyes gentle. He took the candle, grinned awkwardly. "I guess our house will have company now." Little Sa nodded, thinking, a friend can be a candle that understands the wind. Back at noon, the abbot asked, "Have you seen the 3 different kinds of flames?" Little Sa recounted. The abbot said, "Now light a candle inside you, not so others see, but so you know where you are." That afternoon, Little Sa sat alone in the bell pavilion, placed the candle before him, extinguished the oil lamp, closed his eyes. In the dark, he imagined a flame arising just behind his sternum, flickering, then standing. He let his breath be the wind, his heart the wick, his mind the wax. Strangely, for the first time, he heard a very small pop inside. Perhaps a habit burning up. Perhaps a fear. He didn't know, but he felt warmth. But the wind is not always gentle. One late summer afternoon, a storm swept through the valley. The sky gathered like a huge hand clenched. The wind howled on the tiled roof. Bamboo trunks lashed each other like familiar blades, refusing to stay calm. Little Saw ran into the courtyard. The few remaining candles were ripped from their wicks, extinguished in a rush. He tried to shield them, but the wind was too strong. His arms flapped like small gates in a gust. The abbot pulled him into the porch, bolted the latch. "Do not battle the storm," the abbot said. "Learn to bring your fire inside." They gathered the remaining dry candles, carried them into the small shrine, relit each in old glass lanterns. The storm roared outside, but inside the shrine, the flames stood. The little lanterns cast light on the faces of the Buddha statues. The light not bright, but deep. That night, the monastery lost power. The whole village plunged into rare darkness. Yet the courtyard had one patch of light. Villagers followed it, wet and weary panting. They sat close together on the porch, watching the candle in the glass cage. An old woman said, "The wind may be strong, but seeing this candle, I do not fear anymore." A child asked, "Why doesn't the candle go out?" The abbot answered, "Because it knows where." Little Saw understood another sentence. Fire does not fight the wind. Fire only needs to know its home. Some nights, the home is your palm. Some nights, a lantern cage. Some nights, a quiet room with people sitting together to keep warm. Then morning again comes. After the storm, the courtyard was scattered with broken leaves. Little Saw swept, gathered, and buried them in the back garden. While he was re-staking all the candle holders, the abbot brought out a long wick spool. "Look," the abbot said. "A good wick is not one that is thick, but one that is even. If too thick, it burns fast, produces black smoke. If too thin, the flame starves, and the wind topples it. Cut the wick gently. Don't heavy-hand it. Do not hold too tightly when you light it." The abbot took the scissors and cut the wick with patience, like trimming a child's nails. "Life is the same," the abbot continued. "Don't let your heart swell. Like a too thick wick, greed burn fast, smoke black. Nor let it shrink too much, undernourished flame, flickers, fragile. Keep it even." Since then, Little Saw cared for the wick like a gentle habit. He learned when to trim, when to blow, how to shield the flame just enough. Each action became a soft stroke he practiced daily. One day, a stranger came to the monastery carrying a bag of wind, actually just an old paper fan. The man sat fanning slowly, watching the candle. "I sell fans," he said with a smile. "I deal in wind, but I've learned from fire too." He showed little Saw how to watch the flames base, to know if the wick is right, how to hear the faint shh that tells you the wax is melting or sagging, how to place candles far enough apart so they do not consume each other's air. Candles placed too close, he winked, are like people crowding conversation. Everyone tires. They both laughed. It turns out wind and fire can sit and drink tea together. Story 7. The old road that no longer bears anger. That morning, the sky was clear, like a cup of freshly poured water, the birds' calls dropping one by one over the old rooftops. The brick-paved road from her house to the market remained unchanged, the edges of bricks worn by heels, the moss filling cracks like stitching thread, the wild yellow daisies growing where no one watched. She wrapped a thin scarf around her shoulders, carried the darkened bamboo basket, and stepped out of the gate. From the wooden gate to the hill's flank, there were exactly 72 steps. She had counted them since she was 16. That year, her feet ran like water. Her heart carried more winds than bones. That same year, on this very road, a glance caught the one she loved beside another. Sleeves, brushing sleeves, their shadows merging like ink seeping into paper. The old anger lay down in the road like a stone. Each time she passed, she stumbled. From then on, she changed her route. She took the alley to the west, longer, steeper, but it spared her from looking at the place that had pierced her. The detour delayed her arrival at the market. Sometimes she missed the freshest greens, the good news of the day, the seller's hidden smile meant for early customers. But she accepted that, believing she was saving herself. Some say time makes everything fade. But time only made the stone in her chest smoother, easier to step on each time she walked past. One afternoon, by chance, she met a monk at the market. He stood in front of a candle stall, selecting very slowly, as though speaking with a row of unlit flames. She bought a handful of mung beans, then lingered at the candles, looking at them as though they were strange, yet kindly. The monk turned, smiled, asked if she needed help. She shook her head, and for some reason, she told him that she still walked the detour. He asked why. She said, "Because there is a bend where my eyes once ran dry, where my hand once failed to grasp in time." The monk was silent, picked up one candle, looked at its wick. "There are places where the wind blows strong," he said. "So learn to shelter, not to escape, but to pass through. If you run, the wind chases you. If you pass through, the wind ends." She smiled and said, "The wind does not end. It only changes hour." The monk nodded. "Exactly so. Learn your hour." That evening, she sat by the lamp, repeating the monk's words to herself, her hour. What hour was hers? Perhaps the early morning hour when the road was soft. Perhaps the noon hour when others' eyes were tired and looks less sharp. Perhaps the hour after a long rain, when moss smoothed out and the stone inside her could roll without a cry. She took a sheet of paper from her drawer and wrote 3 lines. "Tomorrow, I'll go the old road. Walk slowly. Do not demand my heart be flat immediately." Then she folded it, tucked it beneath the empty glass she had bought the season before, since she heard once of a glass that was broken from the day it was made. She kept it as a reminder. Fragility is not the enemy. Clutching is what causes the fall. The next morning, she woke earlier than usual. The sky still bore a remnant of night. She placed a hand on her chest, felt its pulse, not fast, not slow, like a ferryman steering through shallow bars. She opened the gate. The old road looked at her like a long-lost acquaintance. No reproach, no pleading, just standing there with its scratches and familiar shadows. She placed her foot on the first step. The stone in her chest stirred, but did not roll away. She took the second step. The wind at the alley entrance swept through her hair, carrying the smell of water from the neighbor's well. She took the third, the fourth. At the 10th step, her heart skipped a beat. The brick wall bore a patch of moss shaped like a leaf, exactly where her eyes once swam in a dark moment. She stopped. She reached out and touched the moss. Cold, soft, not biting. She smiled faintly, like someone meeting a cat she once feared, now seeing only its whisker twitch. She continued. The alley unfolded into a bend where sunlight flickered through tree branches above the pavement. There was the bulged brick root that had tripped her when she ran years ago. She stepped past it, paused, turned to look. Just a tired stretch of brick. She whispered sorry to her younger self of that old afternoon, the one who blamed her feet for being too slow. It's okay. Being too slow is also a way of arriving. She moved on each step, unwinding an old string. Above a crested myna perched on a high branch, its crest red like an exclamation mark at the end of a gentle sentence. At the crossroads, where fate bent the wind suddenly rose, she heard the laundry flap across the street, the shutter of a door knocking. The wall where she once leaned with both hands and held her breath was still whitewashed, only now stained. The person from the past was not here. Only she, the basket, a few fallen leaves, a stray ray of sunlight. She stood tall, not shrinking. She loosened her scarf so her neck could breathe. Without looking around, she closed her eyes for a moment and let the wind pass through her face. Before her forehead appeared the bowl of still water the young monk once watched to steady himself. The candle that learned to lean. The smooth pebble that knew warmth in the palm. The stories she'd heard, the stories she'd recited, suddenly were not someone else's. They stood here like silent friends, placing a hand on her shoulder. She smiled quietly, not from joy, but from recognition. The anger that once chased her like a dog now settled like a dragonfly, landing on the bowl, light touching and gone. She passed the turn. The road led her to the market, now wrapped in its own sounds. The knife thud, the call for cakes, the children calling for their mother. She walked slowly past the vegetable stalls. The green of morning glory stretched her chest like a long sigh at the right place. The fish seller looked up, smiled. "Long time since you come this way." She smiled and said, "I missed it." She thought of her kitchen at home, the little window where she placed an empty glass to catch sunshine. Today, she would place a pot of chives too. Today, the old road had brought her to the market as a straight path, no longer a detour. At noon, she passed the well. She drew water. The splash echoed in the stone well like a hidden laugh. She washed her hands. The cold water reaching her wrists drew out the trails of heat left from the morning. She looked at her reflection, saw a face no longer warped by old imaginings. She bent slightly, whispered, "Thank you for waiting." Whether she spoke to the water, or the road, or her own patience, she did not know. Maybe all listened. In the days that followed, she walked the old road as though walking inside a home. Every step, every patch of moss, every tree, shadow, became familiar furnishings, the chair, the shelf, the window frame. On rainy mornings, she carried her old umbrella, its tip chipped. Raindrops pooled in it, like a note suspended. She gazed at the drop like a silent musical note. On bright noons, she walked earlier before the sun squinted the eyes. She greeted the noodle seller, the locksmith, the small dog lying under a motorbike, its belly rising and falling as though daydreaming. She adopted a habit pause at the old bend, not to remember, just to listen. No special sound, just her hour passing. And strangely, the place in her body that once pounded loudest was now the lightest, as if someone's room, once packed full of things, when you open the window and clear, becomes the coolest place in the house. One day, along that road, she met the one from the past. Suddenly, like a shift in wind. He walked with another small, gentle-faced. They spoke in a voice that had learned how not to hurt each other. He paused when he saw her, then bowed. She did the same. No drama, no questions, just a thin smile that would not break. They passed each other like two boats on a narrowing river, each leaning slightly so the waves did not crash into the other's side. As their backs turned, she suddenly recognized the stone in her chest had transformed into a round pebble, rolled once, and settled where it no longer obstructed. She did not feel happier, did not feel sadder. She felt calmer. Like after the rain, the tree did not grow taller, but the ground breathed easier. That afternoon, she went home and opened the window. The last rays of sunlight spilled across the tile floor like a strip of silk. She made a pot of tea. While waiting for the water to boil, she grabbed a piece of paper and scribbled a few lines. Not a letter to anyone. Just a small note she placed under the cup. The road has returned what it owed me. Do not owe it anything more. She smiled, realizing she had once demanded the road repay a debt that was never its to carry. The road was nothing more than bricks, footsteps, and misty mornings. The debt had always been in the way she looked at things. Today, that debt had come undone like a shirt button fastened to the wrong hole. She brought the teapot out to the porch and poured half a cup. The leftover breeze of the afternoon brushed across the rim, making the scent of the tea stand still for a second, then disappear. On the shelf, an empty glass caught a ray of sunlight. The sunlight lay still inside it, like a lazy goldfish. She thought of the old vendor at the market, remembered the even-burning candle wicks, the warm pebble, the quiet bowl of water, and the brown paper packet buried under the bamboo roots in a story someone once told. Each of those things was a piece, and together they formed a quiet map. That map had taken her on a long journey, only to lead her back here to the place of someone who could walk the old road again without dragging her own shadow behind. Sometime later, she began teaching the neighborhood children how to count the steps on the staircase. Each child had their own number. One said 70, another said 71. She laughed and said, "It depends on your stride." One asked why she preferred this path over another. She replied, "Because this one has wild daisies that bloom right on time." The child did not understand, but remembered. Someday they would grow up and learn what wild daisies are, and what it means to bloom on time. One evening, she took a late walk. The street lights spilled golden puddles across the bricks. Her shadow stretched long, then broke at the curve. She paused. On an old wall, a vine she could not name had just blossomed with tiny flowers, small as buttons. Their color was not bright, but steady, like a kind of peace that had no need to show off. She reached out and touched one bloom, but did not pluck it. In that gesture, she understood, or perhaps just believed she understood, that forgiveness is not about erasing what was written. It is about continuing to write until the new pages grow thick enough to make the old ones fade. The old path does not turn into something else. It remains what it is. And she remains who she is. Only the anger no longer needs to pass through. As the night deepened, she returned home and shut the door. Inside, the ticking of the clock swayed like a little boat in a sheltered bay. She put down her bamboo basket, took out the scallions given to her by the fish vendor. On the first day she walked that road again, cleared a thin layer of soil at the doorstep, and planted them. A small row of scallions stood upright like pens waiting for ink. She watered them, clapped her hands 3 times, not out of faith in any deity, but simply to let her hands know the task was done. Then she turned off the light, opened the window, and let the night in like an old friend. Before sleep, she whispered, "Tomorrow, I will walk that path again." It was not a vow, nor a challenge, just a breath repeated. On the far side of sleep, the old road lay still, like a sheet of music, waiting for the morning's notes. Not a song of anger, but a quiet, steady, and free walk. Story 8. The Gratitude. Sleep of the Zen Master. The afternoon gently touched the moss-covered roof tiles, like someone placing a warm, dry cotton cloth down. In the temple courtyard, the footsteps quieted the kitchen smoke from the house behind drew out into a thin thread, and the breeze from the rice fields carried a nameless fragrance, only that it resembled the smell of clothes hung under gentle sunshine. The Zen master sat on the veranda, his back leaning against a wooden pillar, his eyes leisurely following the flight of a flame-colored dragonfly skimming the sunlit patch. He was so old that his hair was as white as sprinkled salt, yet his voice always held the elasticity of a young bamboo shoot, bending here and there without breaking. Every afternoon was the same before the evening bell of chanting sounded, before the candle-lit courtyard became a low sky, before the village quieted like still water. The Zen master had a small ritual. He would slowly walk around in the garden, stop by each vegetable bed, look at a newly sprouted flower bud, touch a bamboo stalk that had grown by another segment, and whisper a thank you that needed no listener. That ritual was not a secret, but few noticed that it was the short bridge from day to night, from wakefulness to sleep, from doing to non-doing. Night fell. The moon poured silver light on the brick path. The disciples lit candles. The flame flickered, then stood still. The master washed his hands in the water basin in front of the veranda. The cool water nipped his wrist like a small fish playing. He dried his hands, placed the towel on the bamboo hanger, watched a moment so water would drip off the edge of the cloth. Then he entered his meditation chamber. The room had 4 wooden walls, a low bamboo bed, a small bookshelf, a wooden bowl on the table, a round pebble like a little moon made of earth lying beside it. On the shelf, in the intentionally left blank space reserved for light, was a thin glass tumbler, not for use, but like a verse without words. The Zen master sat cross-legged on his daybed, lifted the wooden bowl, poured half a bowl of water, and set it down. He closed his eyes. The ritual of sleep began with very ordinary things. A thank you for the feet that walked without complaining, for the hands that held and released, for the eyes that saw without hurried judgment, for the back that stood straight before the wind, for the belly that digested what was hard to digest. Thank you that today a child smiled when picking up the wooden ladle, that an old person finished the bowl of porridge without coughing, that a traveler came asking to sleep over and finished a story without leaving anyone heavy-hearted. Then he thanked the things not quite pleasing. The breeze blew out a few candles. A dog's bark disrupted a section of meditation. The thorn on the rose branch scratched lightly into the back of his hand. Thanks to the grains of sand, he thought the teeth remember the act of chewing. A disciple once asked why the teacher only slept 3 or 4 hours each night, yet woke with eyes as clear as a well. The Zen master smiled and said, "I do not face the night as a battle. I walk through the night as one crosses a bamboo bridge, each step measured my hands still free." Then he pointed to the bowl and said, "Here lies the 2 halves of sleep. 1 half, when you lay your body down on the bed, the other when you lay down what you cannot carry into your dreams, and hope tomorrow you will still be light. Lay it down as one places a brown paper package under the bamboo tree, he said. Do not toss it. If you toss it, then it bounces, and you have to pick it up again. If you place it, the earth receives it, and the rain will take care of the rest. That night, a visitor from the city came seeking audience. The man was in his 40s, his eyes ringed with blue, as if a leaf under many neon lights, his clothes pressed, but his shoulders drooped like a carrying pole, long worn. He said that for many months he had not slept fully. Every night he opened a book, but managed fewer than 2 pages, then switched off the light, lying and staring at the ceiling as though it were a mist placed right on his face. In his mind, there was a long meeting unresolved, a row of numbers demanding a house, a bridge, not yet decided which bank to connect. He had tried music, medicine, fragrances, counting sheep. The sheep passed over the fence, 10, 20 by the 50th sheep. He himself jumped. The fence landed in a patch of old memory and then jolted awake like one falling off a chair. The Zen master invited him to sit, poured weak tea. The candle flame in its glass shade tilted with the breath. The master did not immediately teach an exercise. He only asked, "What do you bring into your sleep?" The man looked puzzled. "I bring fatigue. And what else? I bring self-blame. And I bring my business card." The Zen master nodded, looked at the glass on the shelf. Sleep is a home without a nameplate. He said, the night does not read job titles. When you carry your roles into the night house, they will bump into each other, arguing over who lies on the bed. But the bed holds only one. Invite each guest to the living room, pour a cup of tea, and say, "Tonight, please rest in peace." Saying that he took a small brown-bound notebook from his drawer and placed it into the man's hand. Before you sleep, write 5 things you are grateful for. They need not be grand. The smaller, the better. A coat pin that did not break a grain of rice stuck on the child's cheek. A greeting you missed, not saying loud enough. The man forced a smile. Just doing that. Can I sleep? The Zen master answered. Not to make you sleep, but to see that the day is enough. When the day is enough, the night comes by itself. But my head is noisy, the visitor said, like a market or like an airport. The Zen master pointed at the bowl of water. Place the bowl on your belly. Breathe in, breathe out. Watch the surface of the water. Do not force it still. Sit long enough, and it will still, like the habit of water. Then he told him to take the round pebble. On the table, place it in the palm of his hand. Close his eyes. Feel his hand grow warm. The pebble from the stream endured many waves. Hence, it is round, he said. Your hand will become round too. At last, he lit a small candle, covered it with the glass tumbler. The wind outside comes from many directions, he reminded. Do not fight the wind. Cover it properly. Place it correctly. The lesson boiled down into 3 objects: the bowl of water, the pebble, the candle, old friends of sleep. That night, the man stayed in the guest hut. Before lying down, he opened the notebook, wrote 5 things he was grateful for: a sock that did not lose its pair after being hung, the bowl of amaranth soup that evening was not too salty, a text message, "Have you arrived yet?" from a colleague not very close, the sound of a cat sniffing beneath the veranda that made him smile, the smell of the hand soap in the temple not stinging. After writing, he placed the notebook under his pillow, took the wooden bowl, placed it on his belly, poured some water, watched until the surface of the water stopped breathing for him. He placed the pebble in his left palm. His right hand rested on it, as though shielding a small flame. He blew out the light, leaving only the small candle in the glass shade far from the bed. The candle tilted, then stood up. He closed his eyes, listened to the insect sounds, like a thin blanket drawn from feet to chest. For the first time in many months, between one thought and the next, there was a gap. He fell into that gap as lightly as a leaf old enough to drop from its branch at the proper season. The next morning, he awoke not because of an alarm, but because of birds. The Zen master was already in the courtyard, arms holding a bundle of dry firewood, smiling. Last night, the wind was gentle. The man put his hands together. His eyes had another color, the color of someone who just crossed a bridge and placed his feet on the far shore. He said that he dreamed a strange dream. He walked on a paved path, met many familiar people, but no one called each other's titles. They used their first names. When he woke, he saw that he did not need to finish the glass of water to wake up. The Zen master nodded. Good. The night is the place where first names are visited. In the days that followed, he stayed on, did temple chores, swept the yard, washed bowls, pulled weeds, mixed candle wax. Every evening, he wrote 5 things he was grateful for. Some nights, the words came easily. Some nights, the words were hard. Some nights, he wanted to write 6 or 7, yet still felt lacking. Some nights, he sat for a long time and only wrote 3. The Zen master said, No need for many. 5 is one hand. Once written, you have enough to hold the night. When he prepared to leave the mountain, the master gifted him a wooden bowl, a small pebble, an old paper lantern glass, and a new notebook. Do not turn them into charms, he advised. They are just reminders. One day, you will not need the bowl. You will only need to place a hand on your belly. One night, you will not need the pebble. You will only need to touch the edge of the blanket. There may come a time you will not need the candle because your eyes have learned to close and yet still shine within. He returned to the city. The streets were still noisy. The workload still piled up. But his nights had changed. Before sleeping, he wrote down 5 things he was grateful for: the balcony plant that survived the scorching day, the neighbor who picked up a package left at his door, an old song that played unexpectedly on the radio, noodles boiled to the perfect minute, the new yellow light bulb that was not too bright. One day, he even gave thanks for a tense hours-long meeting because it made his heart break a sweat and washed off the dust of pride. He poured water into a wooden bowl, placed it on his belly, and breathed. He placed the pebble in his left hand, closed his eyes. He lit a candle inside a glass lantern set on the windowsill. The Saigon rain tapped the glass. Wind slipped through the cracks. The flame tilted, then stood. For the first time, he no longer compared his sleep to anyone else's. He slept his own sleep. One late night, the messages flooded in. The project was late. The partner pushed hard. He sat down at the table, his hands trembling, like someone returning from a long journey who could not find his key. He was about to close the notebook, blow out the candle, and open his laptop. At that very moment, his fingers touched the pebble, and a thin layer of warmth ran across his skin. He opened the notebook and wrote, "Thank you for the messages. They mean there is still work to do. Thank you for being pushed. It means I have not been forgotten. Thank you for the fatigue. It means I have a body." After writing, he still had to turn on the computer, but he opened it, like opening a door to the porch, to let the breeze in for a moment, then close it again. When he finished, he shut it down and did not bring it into bed. The night welcomed him like a friend arriving late with no questions asked. At the temple, the Zen master still walked his garden, rounds each afternoon, giving thanks for a leaf that fell in just the right spot, an ant that found its way through spilled wax, a student who trimmed a candle, wick just right. He often said to his students, "Gratitude is not politeness. It is a way to place your heart in the right position so it can sleep." Someone once asked, "What is there to be thankful for?" when we are sick, or grieving, or in pain? He replied, to be grateful for the pain itself is beyond what one can do. But to be grateful for what is not in pain during the pain that is possible. A cup of water, still warm, a hand that can still move, the sound of a bird, still heard a single strand of hair not yet gray. Each is a thread tying us to the shore. Keep a few threads like that, and the night will not carry you too far. There was a young student, sleepless from heartbreak, eyes red for days, lips cracked, laughter like the rim of a chipped cup. He came to the master, asking for a sleep now remedy. The Zen master handed him a blank sheet of paper. Write down your gratitude for that person, he said. The student was startled. But I'm hurting. Why be grateful? Do not be grateful for the pain, the master said. Be grateful for what you learned, because they existed. A new dish you tried to cook. A way to tie your shoes that does not come loose. A shortcut to the bus station. A night you knew how to cry without shame. He wrote the first letters rough, the later ones soft. When finished, he lit a candle, placed the paper beneath the glass, and left it there overnight. The next morning, he brought the page to a bare patch of soil behind the temple, dug a shallow hole, clapped his hands 3 times, and buried it. That night, he slept. Not the sleep of someone who stopped loving, but of someone who had put the paper in its rightful place. Seasons passed. The fields changed clothes. The bamboo added another node. The well water deepened by a finger's length. The Zen master still slept 3 or 4 hours, still rose before the birds, still smiled with the dew. He knew that one day he too would leave like a leaf, ready for its season. But he was not worried about that day. He prepared for it by teaching his students how to sleep first. Who knows how to sleep knows how to die, he once said, then chuckled, seeing his students startled. Death is a long sleep, he explained. Whether you enter it lightly or heavily depends on your heart's nightly habit. If your heart is used to laying things down, it will lay itself down. If it is used to clinging, it will grasp, and grasping causes pain. His students listened, feeling that his words were like a rope tied to a solid post on the riverbank, something to hold on to when the waters rise. One strange evening, the wind shifted. The candle breathed differently. The sky hung low. The Zen master entered his chamber as usual. He poured half a bowl of water, placed it on his belly, closed his eyes, and gave thanks for a crack in the floorboard that tripped no one. For a child brave enough to apologize for spilling wax, for a bowl of porridge not overcooked, for a kstriat that slipped through a row of candles without putting them out. Then he placed the pebble in his left hand, covered it with his right hand like a blanket. He lit a small candle and covered it with the glass shade. Wind passed through the window crack. The flame tilted, then stood. After whispering, "Thank you, body, for doing enough for one day," he lay down. Sleep came like an old friend who knew the way. No knock, no call, just opened the door and entered. Outside, the temple courtyard breathed. Inside, the bowl of water stood holding a small, silent sky. The next morning, he rose at the fourth watch as always. The scent of night still lingered. He opened the door. The mist curled in like a familiar cat. A student sweeping the yard looked up and smiled. The master placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, pointed at a drip of wax in the cracks between bricks, and said, "Let it be." Then he walked the garden. In the corner where brown paper bundles of broken things were buried, a strange sprout had grown, not bamboo, not chrysanthemum, not morning glory, just an unnamed sprout. He looked at it for a long while, then nodded, as if recognizing a friend who arrived without an invitation. Word of the gratitude sleep practice spread to faraway alleys. More people came to the temple to learn how to sleep: the late-night merchant counting money, the night shift nurse, the factory worker on rotating shifts, the elderly afraid of the silence in a big house, the new mother cradling her baby like holding a strip of sunlight, the student before exams, afraid sleep might erase formulas. The Zen master added nothing strange to the lesson. He gave them a bowl of water, a pebble, a candle, a small notebook. "Place it down inside yourself," he said, "not outside." For each person, he adjusted the order slightly. Some needed the pebble first, some the candle. Some only needed to write. Some had to walk once around the garden before sleep, so their feet remembered the feeling of earth, because when feet remember, the mind forgets a little. Some needed to open the window because their night lacked wind. Others needed to close it because their night had too much. One person asked, "What if I am grateful, but still cannot sleep?" He answered, "Gratitude is not a sedative. It is a pillow. What if I can think of nothing to be grateful for? Then be grateful. You are breathing. What if fear sneaks in at night? Offer it a chair. Once it sits, it becomes a guest. What if I forget the ritual? Then forget it. Do it tomorrow. Do not add another layer of self-blame to press against your chest. His lessons were always the same, soft but not weak, firm but not hard. At the end of the year, the temple held a small ceremony. People hung lanterns, washed the water basins, polished the bells. The Zen master asked a student to write a small sign to hang in front of his chamber. Night is home. Beneath it, in smaller letters, enter barefoot. The student asked why barefoot. The master smiled, because shoes carry the noise of the day. Everyone laughed. That night after the ceremony, the Zen master returned to his room and performed his ritual as always. He gave thanks for one more thing, something he rarely said aloud. "Thank you, night, for being patient with me." Then he slept. And so, over the years, the story of the Zen master's gratitude sleep was no longer just one man's story. It became a habit, passed from mouth to mouth, through breath, through brown-covered notebooks sold out at the village corner store, through riverbank, pebbles picked up each afternoon, through old wooden bowls taken down from the kitchen loft. The village nights were not noisier, not quieter. Night remained. Night. But in each home, there were candles that knew how to lean bowls of water that stood still, hands that warmed gradually, and pages that recorded things so small they seemed not worth writing. And in many hearts, there was a door that now closed quietly so that it could open again the next morning without burden. The Zen master grew older, walked more slowly, but his smile never thinned. Some days, he stood for a long time in front of the glass tumbler on the shelf, the sunlight resting on it just long enough. He folded his hands, not to bow to the object, but to greet a lesson that had walked with him since the beginning. Everything carries within it a promise to leave, knowing that one sleeps more deeply because there is no longer a need to stand night watch over what was always meant to fly. Before closing his eyes, he placed his hand on his chest and whispered the same old line. Thank you, body. Thank you, breath. Thank you, day. Then the night carried him across the river like a child who had learned how to sleep well, his head resting on the soft shoulder of peace, his hands needing to hold nothing more. And on the far shore, morning began again like a sip of warm water, simple enough, gentle. Story 9. The Bell That Calls. No one. That noon, sunlight slanted over the temple roof, making the whole valley seem to melt into a thin layer of gold. The cicadas had withdrawn, leaving a silence so deep you could hear the bamboo breathe. On the hill, a large bell hung in a wooden tower. Its shadow stretched across the red tile floor into a shape like a moon fallen midday. Anyone visiting for the first time is surprised because the bell is not hung high like in other temples, but is placed at chest height so that anyone coming can touch it. The villagers call it the bell that calls no one, because it is not used to sound a watch or call for prayer or strike for mourning or celebrate a festival. Only one person is allowed to ring it: the abbot, the meditation master, and he does so only when the wind needs to remember the voice of the earth. That day, a young traveler came to the temple. He wore old sandals, a dusty shirt, and carried a small backpack over his shoulder. His face had a ksham, yet mournful look, as if he had walked farther than sorrow, but did not know where to go next. He asked to stay a few days. The abbot looked nodded and said, "Stay you, who are seeking your own voice." The young man did not understand. He just bowed his head. On the first night, he slept in the guest hut, hearing the wind hitting the wooden walls like someone tapping a rhythm. Outside, the bell remained silent. He imagined the sound of the bell, then fell asleep. But the sleep did not come easily, because in his mind was another tapping memory. Arguments, leaving words unsaid, deleted messages. He got up, walked into the courtyard, and looked up at the bell tower. Moonlight passed through the wooden slats, catching a streak of light on the gray bronze surface. The bell did not ring yet. Its silence echoed like a sound with no ear to hear. The next morning, he met the abbot sweeping leaves. He swept slowly, the bamboo broom moving with the rhythm of his breath. The young man greeted him. The abbot asked, "Did you hear the bell in your sleep?" He said, "I heard the silence." The teacher smiled. "Good. People often call silence an emptiness, but silence can also be a sound in a shape." Then he asked, "What are you here seeking?" He said, "I am not sure. Perhaps peace. Where is peace? I thought here." The teacher raised his head, looked at the bell, and said softly, "If peace exists outside, when the wind changes direction, it will go. Better to let it live in the cage of your chest where your real bell hangs." The days passed in little tasks, splitting firewood, carrying water, washing dishes, weeding. Each task was like a letter in a sutra. No one wrote, only read by hands. In the afternoon, the abbot led him up to the bell tower. This bell, the teacher said, was cast in a year of great storm, when the village lost nearly all its roofs. The caster did not make it to call anyone, but to remember that silence also has a voice. The teacher placed his hand on the rim, tapped it gently with his fingertip. A deep tone emerged, spreading like a wave, not loud, not lasting, but with a pull that made the young man feel his heart shift. Each person, the teacher said, has a bell inside. Some let dust cover it, some strike it too often. If you strike your bell with anger, it cracks. With fear, it chokes. With love, it softens. With understanding, it becomes whole. At night, he lay again. The waxing moon hung like a thin brushstroke on the edge of the roof. He remembered the teacher's words, tried listening to his inner bell. At first, it was only his heartbeat, fast, chaotic. He did not force it. After a while, the pace steadied. He realized it was not just the heartbeat, but the breath, the blood rushing through the joints, the blanket brushing the mat, the drip of water from the roof into the metal bowl outside. Each small sound was like a rhythm tapping the bell inside his chest. He drifted off to sleep without knowing when. Early morning, the mist was thick, the bell damp. The abbot stood before the tower, eyes half closed, holding the wooden mallet. The young man approached, watched without daring to ask. The teacher touched the mallet to the bell. A low tone rang out, then silence. "Why did you not ring it again?" he asked. The teacher answered, "One tone is enough for the wind to carry. But that tone is too small." The teacher smiled. "The wind does not need loud. It only needs real." Then he asked, "Did you hear anything?" He shook his head. "That is fine," he said. "Hearing is the wind's work, not the ears." The words hung in his mind all day. The next day, the abbot asked him to help clean the bell. With each pass of the cloth over the bronze surface, a streak of light rose, then faded. The young man noticed ancient Chinese characters carved on the bell's body worn away. He asked their meaning. The teacher said, "The old meaning is nothing. The meaning today is knowing." The bell was not made to call people, but to call knowing back. He asked teacher, "Have you ever felt lonely?" The teacher said, "Yes, loneliness is when you hear the bell and imagine no one else hears with you. But the wind hears. The earth hears. The trees also hear. You just must not expect them to answer." One afternoon, rain swept through. Black clouds, distant thunder wind lashing across the courtyard. He ran out to gather the drying clothes. The water overflowed from the tiles. Thunder rolled like a drum. In that clamor, he suddenly heard a long boom. No one struck the bell, but it rang by itself because the wind struck its body. The tone blended with the rain, becoming a strand of sound, both strange and intimate. The abbot stood under the porch, looking at the rain and smiling. See the bell that calls, no one has come. It calls the rain itself. The storm passed, leaving behind puddles round like children's eyes, looking at the sky. He stood before the bell, wet, listening to his heart resonate too. That night, he asked Teacher, "Why did I feel the bell's tone was sad today?" The teacher said, "Because your heart was sad." The bell just reflects what the listener hears. Some hear it calling mother, some hear their own name, some hear silence. The bell is only wind passing through metal. The meaning lies in the one who listens. He was silent. For the first time, he understood why some weep upon hearing a bell and some fall asleep. That night, he sat before the tower for a long time. He did not wait for a ring, only sat occasionally touching the cold bronze. In the morning, he discovered he had fallen asleep in a seated posture, his head resting on the metal face. On the 7th day, he prepared to descend the mountain. The abbot walked him to the gate. He asked, "May I strike the bell once?" The teacher nodded. He held the mallet, inhaled, deeply struck. The bell rang, but the sound did not carry far. He felt a little disappointment. The teacher smiled and said, "That tone is not for the wind, but for the one who strikes." He looked back and saw the shell's surface a little brighter than before. Or perhaps his eyes had changed. The teacher said, "Whenever you feel silence, yet your heart still trembles, remember to strike a tone within yourself. No need for a bell. Use your breath. Inhale, strike. Exhale, resonate. The wind will remember." He descended the mountain. A few months later, the abbot passed away. They say on that morning, before he left this world, the teacher rose early, climbed the tower, struck the bell once so small that the guest hut below did not hear, only felt the wind stir over the roof as if someone stepped lightly. When the disciples climbed up, they found the teacher seated beneath the bell, his hand on his knee, a smile still on his lips. The bell has not been struck since, because no one dared. But each time the wind passes through, people still hear a low tone slipping among the leaves, so faint that if one's heart is not still, one might miss it. Many years later, the traveler returned. The old bell tower had more moss, the garden had grown wider. He walked around his fingers, brushing the cool bronze surface. The wind picked up. A faint tone, unclear whether real or imagined, gently echoed in his chest. He smiled, bowed to the bell, then turned to leave. When he reached the bottom of the steps, he looked back and saw a child staring up at the tower, eyes bright. The child asked their mother, "Mom, why does the bell not ring?" The mother replied, "Because it is waiting for the wind." The child thought for a moment, then said, "I will blow." Then they pursed their lips and blew a breath. The breeze was soft, but the almond leaves above the porch stirred slightly, and perhaps, just perhaps, somewhere, within the deep layers of the world's sound, a bell rang, calling no one, only calling life back to its rightful rhythm. And from that moment on, wherever there is someone who knows how to truly listen, that bell can still be heard, not to call, but to remind that even silence has a heart. Story 10. The grain of salt, dissolved in the sea. Early in the morning, off the shore, a thin, briny breeze nudged in as salty as the touch of your tongue against the open rim of a salt jar. The salt village lay right along the shore, its drying pans gleaming like 1,000 flat mirrors tilted toward the sky. The sky passed by without being awkward. The clouds drifted without needing to tidy themselves. On the stone seawall, the old Zen master stood leaning on a wooden post, his light brown robe fluttering like a strip of dried seaweed. Next to him stood a woman in her early 30s, her hands calloused from work, her eyes holding the kind of patient light you find in someone who has grown used to waiting for the sun. Her name was Nin. All her life, she had lived with salt. Her parents left her several drying pans and a small hut by the shore. Her husband had gone to sea and never returned one storm season, leaving her with a little son who had just begun to speak. Nin said that in recent years she slept as though she were hugging a sack of salt that had soaked through with water, heavy, sticky, and stinging with salt. She came to the hillside temple not to ask for a drop of miracle, but simply to ask why there was a handful of salt inside her chest that would not dissolve. The Zen master listened, nodded, and asked no more. He simply pointed to the beach, where the crystals of salt exposed themselves under the sun, white enough to seem as if they might fall with sound. "Do you see the salt?" he asked. "Yes, sir," she answered. "Where does the salt come from?" "From the seawater, from the sun, from the wind, from the hand of the person." The master smiled. "That is right. And when salt meets the sea again." Nin was silent, looking at the surface of the water. The thin wave touched the shore, pulled back a step, leaving a foamy line like a streak of chalk. "When salt meets the sea," she said slowly, it dissolves. To dissolve is to disappear, or to return home, the Zen master asked. The question lodged in Nin's ear like a grain of sand, accompanied her all morning, slipping into each motion of patching leaks in the bottom of a drying pan, into each rhythm of her hand, stirring a bucket of salty water into the sound of chicken skin crackling in a small stove at the alley mouth, into the look in her son's eyes when he pointed at the sky and asked why the sun had a smell. The day drifted on the sand. The sun passed through the brim of the conical hat, leaving a ring of light on her forehead. By noon, the breeze ceased its strength. The salt stood still, as though breathing. A flock of migratory birds drew a black line across the edge of the sky. Nin carried her rice ball down to the shore, sat on her familiar, bulging rock, her back against the rough seawall. She pulled out a piece of rice ball from her cloth bag, dipped it into salt and sesame. The salt dissolved. Before the rice, the sesame cracked under her teeth. The briny smell made her remember the night her husband left. That night, the sea was black and deep, like a promise folded in half. He put on his jacket, said he would return tomorrow, bringing his wet net and the laughter of his boatmates. Nin tied the scarf for him, told him not to stand at the bow when the wind changed. They did not say much, because the most important things do not need many words. The next day, the sea returned, a broken buoy, then went silent. She carried that silence inside her for years, silent yet heavy, silent yet unwilling to dissolve. She went to the temple, lit a stick of incense, sometimes spoke mildly to the sky, sometimes apologized to the sand for stepping too hard. But her sleep remained sticky as a hand that has just clutched a handful of wet salt. In the afternoon, Nin climbed the hillside via the old path, her shirt soaked with a fine layer of salt. The brown cloth lightened, as though she had just walked through a very thin rain. The Zen master sat on the threshold of the house in front of him, a wooden bowl and a gray pebble. On a corner shelf, there was a thin glass cup. The rays of the evening sun passed through it, the body of the cup standing like a breath held upright. The Salt Village. The master said, teaches a person two things at once, to gather and to dissolve. Gathering is the craft. Dissolving is the way. He poured half a bowl of water, dropped a small pinch of salt into it. In a blink, the water changed its taste, though its face remained clear. Salt does not need noise to become the sea. He smiled. It simply needs to meet its own. What handful of salt are you keeping inside you? Nin looked at the bowl, her voice sinking. I am holding something I have not yet spoken. Try speaking it in your heart, then place it down here. The master placed his hand on the mat between them. How do I place it down? She asked. As you scatter salt on a drying pan, spread it evenly. Do not heap it. Do not be stingy with your hand. What needs sun will meet the sun. What needs wind will meet the wind. What needs rain will know itself moist so that it can dissolve. That evening, Nun did not leave immediately. She stayed to listen to the chanting of sutras. The wooden clapper sounded steady, like the footsteps of someone unhurried. When everyone else left, she sat a little longer. The sutra was like a strip of water flowing through the heart, carrying a little sand, exposing the bottom of the well. She asked the master if he could do some ritual so she could let go. Yes, he said, but do not expect it to be a pair of scissors, one snip and done. It is like a hand washing a greasy bowl, warm water, a little ash from the stove, a few circular strokes, and wash it again. We perform the ritual like that. He gave her a brown piece of paper, a thin string, a small shovel. Tonight, write down everything you have not yet spoken with the sea, with your husband, with yourself. When done, fold it, tie with the string. Tomorrow morning, go to the shore, dig a shallow hole, place the bundle down, clap your hands 3 times, cover it with earth. Pour 1 scoop of seawater, not to bury it in order to forget, but so that those words can change form. Nun went home, lit a candle. Her son slept under the mosquito net, his foot sticking out a little, his thumb rubbing against his index finger, like 2 grains of rice embracing each other. She opened the paper. The first lines pricked like fish spines, the following ones softer. She wrote what she had not managed to say that night. Do not stand at the bow when the wind changes. She wrote what she had not said in the days after I was so tired, but I did it. She wrote what she had never told herself. I am not at fault for not being able to bring the sea to the shore. Tears fell for a moment. The salt of the tears merged with the smell of beeswax. She folded the paper, tied the string, placed it under the thin glass cup, like a way of capturing the breath of the words, just warm. The next morning, the sun rose like a large coin running from someone's hand. Nin carried the bundle to the shore. The sand was damp, moldable. A little ghost crab crossed sideways, leaving 2 punctuation marks like eyes. She dug a small hole, placed the bundle down, clapped her hands 3 times. The sound of her claps rose then dissolved in the sound of the waves. She scooped one scoop of seawater, poured it lightly. The water met the sand, soaked in, pulled back, leaving a dark, wet ring, like a lip touching the earth. She stood there a long while, neither praying nor asking, simply helping her own two hands learn how not to grasp. As she turned to leave, her back felt lighter by a strand. In the days that followed, Nin went to work like every day, but her movements had a slight difference, as if a heavy tone mark had been replaced by a soft accent. She stirred, she carried the load she scattered. She noticed that she grumbled less under her breath. When the sky drew unusual clouds, she blamed the dull axe. She was less angry at the small snail clinging to the edge of the pan. Each afternoon, she climbed the hill. The Zen master gave her another salty koan, salt and wound, which dissolves, in which Nin brought the question down to the beach, looked at her hands with small cuts caused by salt rubbing. The salt fell into the cuts, stinging, then cleansing. Salt hurts so as to clear the way, she thought, and fresh water soothes so that the place will know to forget. She scooped one scoop of well water to wash her hands, thanked both the sting and the ease. One midday, a southern wind rose, and the salt's scent became sharper. A boat flying a black flag with a white spot slanted into the bay, its engine sputtering loosely. On the bow stood a young man, thin of build. He brought the boat close to shore, jumped up, and asked his way to Mrs. Haidaw's house. Nin pointed. At the first glance, she found something familiar in his face. Not the features, but the way he lowered his eyes whenever the wind pressed, like someone who had once stood many times at a ship's bow. As he turned away, she called out, "Hey, you take the bow and watch for the wind." He turned back, offered a faint smile. "Yes, I'm used to it." His reply made something inside Nin move. Not the anger locked in place, but an undercurrent of water shifting direction. That afternoon, when she told the Zen master, "Turns out, I once wanted to fix the wind," he nodded. "That's right. And now I learn to tilt like that candle." The Zen master handed her a bowl and said, "Tonight, do one more thing before you sleep. Write 5 things you are grateful for. They do not need to be large. The smaller, the better. A grain of salt not spilled out of the basket. A child without fever. A bowl of porridge not scorched. A cricket singing at the right time. A cloud passing without angering the sun." Nin tried. On the first night, she wrote slowly. The next night, the words came easier. There was a night She even thanked the hoarse call of the fish seller, because that voice scattered a dark thought that was setting up house. After each time of writing, she put the bowl of water on her belly, watching the surface settle. The gray pebble, warm under her hand like a little egg. She lit a candle in the thin glass. The wind at the window bent the flame just a little, then ceased. Sleep came like a small boat finding its bay. One morning, the mist was thick, the seawall slippery. Nin slipped her calf, scraped a rock edge, leaving a long tear. The bleeding was little but fierce because salt sprayed into it. She sat down, breathed, let the sting go through like a knife through soft wood. A neighbor ran to her, applied some cold rice water. To the cut, temporarily stuck a banana leaf patch. "Salt cleans," the woman said. "Rice water soothes." Nin smiled at the lesson. Made real life is not just one taste. That afternoon, when she washed the wound, she pinched a little salt, looked closely at each grain, like looking at her own words before letting them fall on her tongue, which grains were needed, which were superfluous. On the full moon day, the temple by the hill held a small ceremony. The villagers brought candles, bowls of water, pebbles found in the stream, and each a piece of brown paper. The Zen master sat on the porch and taught them a lesson. Today, each person mix a bowl of their own salt water. Too much salt, and the water is hard to drink. Too little, and it is bland. Just right, the water becomes soup. So it is with seasoning the heart. He told each one to drop into the bowl a pinch of what was still salty, a memory, a spoken sentence, a person's name, an unfinished thing. Then stir. Then drink one very small sip. Swallow it, he said, so you know the taste has become part of you. Do not spit it out. Spitting is holding the bitterness on your tongue. Nin obeyed. The salty water passed her throat like a little sea entering a house. She found she no longer tried to dismiss the taste, only learned to stand in it until it softened. Storm season arrived. The wind pushed the smell of seaweed onto the shore. The water turned murky, like the chest of someone who has just wept. The drying pans were covered with tarpaulin. Nin tied stakes, pulled ropes. One night, the storm smashed half the village. In the morning, people counted what remained. Nin's hut had lost its roof. Her salt sacks soaked the crystals, half dissolved. She sat down, gripped a handful of wet salt, and released it. Dissolve is homecoming, she murmured, the old question of the Zen master. Or is it loss? She watched her son wading in puddles, smiling, because he caught a little fish trapped in a brick cavity. She called him over, rinsed his hands, and said, "Sea water knows its way. Do not be afraid." That evening, the village gathered at the temple. The Zen master lit a large candle in a glass lantern in the courtyard. He did not speak of loss. He did not speak of effort. He only told the story of a grain of salt that searched for its flavor amid the storm season. When there were no drying pans, it lay in the throat of the wind. When there was no sun, it lay in the mouth of the wave. Wherever it dissolved, it did not forget its name. After the storm, the village slowly rebuilt. People helped each other, re-roof, set new stakes, dry again, patch again. Nen removed the wet salt sacks, shook them gently to drain the water, took the remainder to cook into fish sauce, amber brown, like an evening that has not yet faded. "Nothing is lost," she told her boy, "just changed place and changed form, like your father, like the salt, like the sun." She smiled as she spoke, for she heard herself sting less, even when she said the old name. At night, she again wrote 5 things she was thankful for: a borrowed roof that withstood rain, a young man returning her forgotten shovel, a sleep without interruption, a cat that gave birth to 3 kittens in the kitchen corner, a handful of wet salt she could not bear to throw away yet, that became a just-seasoned pot of soup. She placed the bowl of water on her belly, cupped the pebble in her hand, the candle in the thin glass tilted, and then stood straight. Sometimes the old sadness returned unexpectedly, like a stray wave. Nen was scattering salt when she paused, felt her heart choke. She set aside her scoop, sat on the lip of the pan, called her husband's name once, not to demand, only to say hello. She picked up a very large grain of salt, placed it on her tongue. The salty taste burst, then dissolved. "I remember," she said in her heart, "but I no longer want to fix the wind." She stood up and scattered again. That afternoon, when she told the Zen master, he only smiled. There are pains that do not need to leave. They only need to learn to behave. A pain that knows how to say good morning and good night is no longer a thief. 1 year later, the screw pine tree in front of Nin's hut had grown 2 hand spans taller, its roots gripping the sand like 5 fingers reaching for the sky. The salt season succeeded. The crystals stood straight at right angles to the sun, shimmering softly when poured into sacks. The young boatman from that day stopped by the village, bringing a haul of silvery fish for the village. He sat drinking water on Nin's doorstep, told stories of the sea-changing current, of his 1-year-old son learning to speak the word wind before Dad. Nin smiled, handed him another glass of cool water, her inner self calm like a drying pan, just smoothed flat. When he left, she did not look back. She simply picked up a grain of salt that had fallen on the threshold, placed it in her palm, lifted it to eye level. The tiny grain of salt sparkled like a miniature meteor, falling just as someone looked up. She placed the grain on her tongue. The salty taste touched a memory that no longer ached. At the end of summer, the Zen master weakened. He called Nin and said, "I am about to go like a grain of salt into the sea. Do not cry for it to taste saltier." Nin smiled through her tears. "When you go, who will I ask when the wind changes?" "Ask the sea," he said. "Ask the bowl of water. Ask the gray pebble. Ask the candle. They are all the sea placed into different forms." He instructed her, "On the day I leave, do not strike the bell loud. Just walk slowly around the courtyard and thank the sun." On the day he departed, like a falling leaf, Nin did as told. She walked around the courtyard, touched the stone steps, the glass lantern, the wooden shelf holding the thin glass cup. She thanked a sun, not too harsh, a wind not too fierce, thanked a fly that avoided the water bowl, thanked the chanting voice that did not miss a beat. That night, she slept through the night in her dream, saw the Zen master standing in the middle of a wide salt field, picking up a handful of salt, releasing it into the air, and the clouds suddenly sweet-smelled. The salt village went through many more seasons. Nin's son grew gradually, his feet running on the edge of the pans without stumbling his hands, knowing how to shake the sieve evenly like a song. Nin taught him to count the wind's rhythm, look at the cloud's color, listen to salt falling. She taught him to write 5 things to be thankful for in the evening, to light a candle in a thin glass when afraid to place a bowl of water on his belly when his heart was cold. One day, the boy asked Mom, "Does salt get tired?" "Yes, it does. So it dissolves. Then where does it go?" "Back home in your mouth, in your mother's sweat, in someone's tear, then into the sea." The boy nodded, as though he understood all the circles of life. One afternoon, Nin stood by the shore and dropped a handful of salt into the waves. The white grains met the water and vanished without a trace. She did not see loss. She saw a door open. In the wind, she heard a soft voice like a bell on the hill. Behind them, calling no one, simply reminding that silence too knows how to sing. She clasped her hands, not to pray, but to send a greeting to all the things that had dissolved in her life. A hand, a promise, a storm, a sleepless night, a drop of sweat, asleep. A grain of salt. She turned her back and walked along the drying pans that were about to be filled. On the sand, her footprints were like bowls neatly placed on a shelf, waiting for dinner. On her shoulders, the carrying pole no longer bore the sweat of striving, but only the scent of sun that had ripened. Night came. She opened her notebook and wrote 5 things to be thankful for a grain of salt falling in the right afternoon sun. A seagull flying low without disturbing the sea's reflection. An old woman buying coarse salt by mistake, but smiling and saying that made it better. A strand of gray hair growing in a place easy to see. A question from her son. Mom, what does the wind smell like tomorrow? She placed the bowl of water on her belly, held the pebble in her palm, lit a candle in the thin glass. The sea wind slipped through the window bars. The flame bowed, then stood upright. Outside, the fishing lights far off blinked like signals in an ancient language. Inside, sleep came like a gentle tide, cool, full, then receding. Before she drifted off, she heard the first words of the Zen master, now echoing as her own voice. When salt meets the sea, it does not vanish. It remembers its name. The next morning, she rose before the birds. The sea lay there like a friend who had just finished a long story breathing. Nin walked out, holding the scoop. The new day began with the sound of salt falling into a basket, the plink, plink, small as rain in the chest. And in that sound, she recognized that she had learned the hardest art of the salt maker, to gather in order to nourish and know how to dissolve, to return. In that coming and going, the handful of salt in her chest was no longer a hard ball. It had turned into flavor, a salt taste just right enough for the soup's soul, enough for a drop of sweat to be fragrant enough for a tear not to be bitter. She smiled, scattered a thin layer over the drying pan, her hand open enough that the wind could pass through without being held. On the horizon, the sun lifted itself like an enamel bowl. And within that bowl, there was one small grain of her salt shimmering, dissolving, and going home. So the journey today has gone through 10 stories, 10 small grains of salt, of wisdom, of compassion, of moments, to look back at oneself amid a life of many waves. Each story is a breath, a footstep, a soft pillow for the spirit when it is weary. When we listen to them, it is not to memorize, but to dissolve into their rhythm like dewdrops melting in sunlight, like grains of salt dissolving into the sea, like a bell that calls no one but still touches every heart that remains awake. If you are hearing these lines, in the dark, release your shoulders, take a deep breath, and then exhale slowly. Everything you have been through, anger, sadness, regret, love, can dissolve not because they disappear, but because you become wide enough to embrace them. Sleep will come as a gentle friend. No door knock, just quietly sitting beside you, placing its hand on your forehead and saying, "It is enough, now sleep." Thank you for journeying with our channel during these 3 hours, where each story is a lamp, and you are the one who keeps it burning with your breath. If you feel your heart lighter, your mind calmer, take a second to click the subscribe button so you do not miss the next meditative journeys. Every week, we will send you new Zen stories. The sound of silent bells, gentle breezes, carrying reminders. You do not need to travel far to find peace. Just sit still and listen to yourself. Breathe. Wishing you a peaceful night. May your sleep be as deep as a pond without a ripple. And when morning comes, may your first smile be a sign of a new day born in peace. Subscribe to the channel to continue walking with us on the path of the Zen stories, where every breath is a miracle.